out and, I'm having the beautiful fractal light show and geometric patterns and, every breath was delicious and the music was sublime. And then like that, I found myself in what appeared to be a Nazi concentration camp, a death camp, I'll call it, not a concentration camp only, but a death camp. And I was in the line of people that were scheduled to be executed in the ovens or in the gas chambers. I still look back at this as being one of the most astoundingly frightening and amazing experiences of my life, because I knew I wasn't physically there, but I also didn't know what would happen if I got to the gas chambers and was executed.
I'm your host, Brandy Fleck, and this is Human Amplified. This is a show about our existence, our place in the world, what it all means, and ways to make it better. From big picture ideas that blow your mind to practical life advice, we explore it all. We amplify the voices of healers, survivors, mystics, disruptors, scientists, creatives, and everyday people like you and me to expand our consciousness and use that awareness to evolve into who we really want to be in the depths of our soul. Humans Amplified. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoy this episode, please go rate and review the show. And remember to subscribe where you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Support for this podcast comes from Bed of Nails. You've probably seen acupressure products before, maybe in your Facebook feed or something like that. It could be for any number of brands, but it's a fact that the Bed of Nails is the Swedish original. I've been using the Bed of Nails mat and pillow since 2012. I personally remember when no other products were widely available and when I was scared to even try it. When you lay on it at first, it can get a little uncomfortable, but that's short-lived. After a few minutes, your back gets warm, starts pulsing, and then starts to relax. You quickly get used to distributing your weight on the Bed of Nails, and it's nothing but a welcomed reprieve from a stressful day. Over the years, it's helped me increase circulation, relax, and reduce pain in my back and neck. I also use my Bed of Nails every single time I meditate, and I love it. If you feel like you would like to do the same, you can shop my Bed of Nails affiliate link to get yours. I have put that link in the show notes of the episode, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can find it in the description of this video. And there is also a discount code there for you where you can get 15% off at checkout. So be sure to go get it. For the links mentioned throughout this episode, check the description box on YouTube or the show notes at humanamplified.com/episodes/144. What does being human mean to you?
How many hours do we have?
Yeah, it's a big
I actually did a little bit of homework on that. I thought about it and came up with a list, which I think each one of these is important. To be human is to self-reflect and to self-correct, to remember where we came from, not just biologically, but historically, to face where we've gone wrong without flinching and to commit to doing better into the future. To know that we were born, we live, and we die, and that the time between is astoundingly precious. To search for what is real in us beneath ideas, culture, and belief, to find that still place, untouched by mind, and to center our lives around that deepest love within, to have compassion and mercy, to ask the hard questions of ourselves and not to turn away from the answers we may discover, to make amends and to take responsibility, to know we are of the earth, formed from it, living through it, and will be returning to it someday. To live with heartbreak, not so much as a burden, but living through it, returning to what it is inside, to let it pry us open and not close us down, to recognize ourselves when we look into the eyes of another, to listen to the quiet guidance of the heart even when the world shouts otherwise, to know that healing is possible even in the times of the deepest wounding, to be able to say I was wrong and to mean it, to be able to recognize I was right and to mean it. That's it.
Wow. That is beautiful. I think that's one of the
Thank
most
you.
thoughtful, thorough answers I've ever gotten over the years. So thank you for that.
It's a big, like I said, how many hours do we have to dive into each one of those? Because there's a lot of meaning in there.
Yeah. One of the things you said that really stood out to me was that we are of the earth and we return to the earth.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. And actually, that goes a little bit deeper because every element on the earth was created in stars. So we are of the stars and we will return to the stars someday.
With over 40 years of experience in acupuncture, Chinese medicine, and natural health care, and 2 decades immersed in the healing traditions of Amazonian shamanism, Dr. Richard Grossman has dedicated his life to helping others transform trauma into personal growth. His work spans continents and consciousness, blending science and spirit in deeply grounded, practical ways. He's based in Los Angeles, California, and he's the author of Trust and Forgive, The Medicine of Your Life, a reflective guide built on half a century of clinical insights, ceremonial leadership, and lived exploration. Far from prescriptive, his message invites listeners to find their own way back to joy, peace, and inner truth. Drawing from his background in sound healing, plant medicine, and traditional Asian wisdom, Richard reframes trauma not as a permanent wound, but as a catalyst for awakening. And through his Heart Feather platform, Richard guides spiritual travel experiences and shares teachings that remind us of the value in slowing down, listening inward, and embracing the walk rather than the Lambo ride to self-discovery. He's passionate about expanding access to healing modalities beyond pharmaceuticals, making ancient tools accessible to modern lives for people navigating anxiety, disconnection, or burnout. And with that, I'm excited about the conversation we're going to have today that spans most of the topics, including but not limited to having patience in the healing process and plant medicine and anything else that comes up as we're talking today. So, Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Brandy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this conversation. And before we dive in completely, what else do you want listeners to know about who you are?
I mean, that's a pretty thorough bio. I think if I were to say what else should people know about me, what was missing in the bio was I do one-on-one online consultations and shamanic therapy. I also like to share myself with people, to share my heart, to share love.
Nice.
And I think that's the core. I have a Substack that I post regularly on and a few other things out there. And I enjoy this.
Okay. Wonderful. And we'll definitely make sure all those links are included at the end. So guys, to go to the show notes for those things. There will be plenty there for you to check out. And let's go back to what you were saying when you were talking about what it means to be human. We were talking a little bit about being of the earth also means that we are of the stars. Tell us more.
Well, this is reality. It's not airy fairy stuff. The universe formed somehow. Nobody knows because, according to physicists, we're within a very brief time before it began, which is many millions of years, is how far they've been able to go back. Maybe less. I don't really know. I'm not up to it right now. But, at one point there was nothing, and then there was a universe. How, why, where, nobody knows yet. We can have philosophies, we can create religions, we can assume. But, in that moment of creation, our universe formed. And it formed first into gas, and the gas coalesced into stars. The stars exploded with some heavy metal, with some metals being created and some of the other elements, because it was originally just hydrogen, I think. And so this keeps on going through the process of nuclear fusion inside of the stars until there's elements that are floating through creation that, when they come into the gravitational pull of a star, form planets. And so the earth, every element on the earth was formed in stars because everything was formed in stars. So because they were formed in stars and we are of the earth because every atom in us is from the earth, we are from the stars. I think Joni Mitchell said it, we are stardust.
Yeah.
It's not a analogy, it's truth.
Yeah. I really love to think about that. And this might be quite a leap, but thinking about us being of the stars just takes me straight to like unity consciousness. We are all one. Is there a connection there? And what is that thread?
It's so interesting to consider this. When we coalesced into the earth, and I'm using we consciously, when we coalesced into the earth and became, eventually dinosaurs or plants or fish or whatever, and then evolution happened over, a few billion years, and suddenly we're walking humans, thinking humans who are able to think, who are able to make decisions and judge. And so we've chosen in a way or evolved into separation. You are you, I am me, they're them. The dog that I see on my walks is a dog. So we've evolved into separation. But is there not a unity between us all that may be hidden? Because the great poets said it. I think it was Rumi who said, my heart and your heart are one and the same. So at that level of heart, which is outside of matter, talking about not the pump, of course, but the love within, outside, in that aspect, there is no separation. The separation is what can be called illusion or Maya,
Mm.
because the separation happens via the agency of the thinking mind or of the brain. I can see you as Brandy over on the other side of the country. You can see me as Richard on the other side of the country. But at the level of soul, there's no time and space, and there's no separation. That's the reality that is so challenging to get to, that is so unobvious that that's something that is real. And, people will say, oh, well, that's airy-fairy, new agey stuff. But I'm not the first person to say this. And the first person to say this probably said it thousands of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You can go back into Egyptian esoterica, and they're talking about the same stuff. Maybe not with the suns and the stars and stardust and stuff like that, but the realization that there is something within that is pure, that is perfect, that is beyond thought and beyond space and beyond time.
Why
It's
is
not an
that?
idea.
Yeah. Why is that hidden or so hard to see?
Yeah. That's such a good question. The easiest answer for me to give is it's hidden so we can find it.
Ooh.
I don't personally believe in an idea of God that is God the string puller, God who's giving us our challenges, God who's giving people rewards and punishments. I don't believe in that. It doesn't make sense to me in everything that we know. And I really go into this extensively in my book as well. But, why is it there? Because finding it is the most beautiful thing a human being can do.
That's
Because
really cool.
we're not talking about the idea of love within. We're talking about love within. We're not talking about the idea of God within. We're talking about using the force of our spirit, of our consciousness, of our mind, of our focus to actually begin to explore that inner landscape. And, that's a place where plant medicines can come in as being incredibly valuable because we tend to not go there naturally. There's too many other distractions. I wake up, I have to, have my coffee or tea or protein drink and brush my teeth, take a shower really quickly, put on my clothes, go to work. have a coffee break, have lunch, have a coffee break, go home, maybe go out to dinner, get home, exhausted, turn on the television for a couple hours, fall asleep, rinse and repeat. There's no time there for it.
Mm.
And that's been recognized. There's been the idea of going on a spiritual retreat forever, going out to the desert. All of the scriptures talk about the saints going out into the desert or up into the mountains or someplace to spend focused years, years and years sometimes on that inner search to find themselves. And plant medicines are here now because they're not a shortcut, but they're a speeding up of the process, I would say.
Is finding that love, that unified heart space, the same thing as finding ourselves?
Yes. Nothing else to add to that, but yes.
Yeah.
I will add, it's also the same as finding what the enlightening beings of the past and present would call God.
Mm.
I forget where I heard this, but there's one poem that said, if I say God is only within me, I'm neglecting the rest of creation. If I say God is only outside of me, I'm putting God to shame. That's an original.
Yeah.
Can't have that separation. And again, by God, I don't mean anything to do with the religious idea of God. I wish there was a different word.
Yeah.
In English. Yeah.
I guess some people call it source or creator.
Source.
Or.
Yeah. Atman.
Well, I think this is all related to healing trauma, which is another sort of seemingly big leap. But as you're talking about these things, I'm thinking about integration as part of healing and fragmentation as part of being wounded. What are your thoughts?
I think that's a really good way to put it. Trauma is like ancient. In the Bible, I'm not sure if it's Genesis or someplace, but someplace in the Old Testament, in the Torah, it said the sins of the father are vested upon the children and the children's children to the fourth generation. I think fourth generation is extraordinarily optimistic. I think we're living at the end point of a chain of trauma that goes back even potentially to pre-humans.
Mm.
Because it's known, if I'm traumatized, traumatized and not healed, I will put that trauma on my children and on those around me, not consciously, unconsciously. So if that's been going on, and trauma by its very nature is constrictive, you can see a dog that's been abused, it's like hiding, doesn't want to be seen. So if this chain of trauma goes back, it is the cause of war, it is the cause of suffering, it is the cause of so much that's going on in the world, of greed, of guilt, so much that's going on in the world today. And an unbroken chain. I can't think of any culture or time period in history that lasted for a while where there was peace. I'm not a historian, but probably there are a few, but I can't think of any. And, so when we're here now today in this moment, which is the most precious time a human being can have because we're alive right now, we also have the possibility to heal the trauma of ages. That's what my book is about. Trust and Forgive, the medicine of your life. It's about healing this traumatic chain of ages. And the beautiful thing is, I don't have to go into past life therapy and pick apart every single of the past lives I may or may not have, or imagining, or somebody else is putting in my head. I can go, again, to that source within with utter and total acceptance and forgiveness for everything that I am and everything that I'm not, and release the chains of trauma. Not at once, of course. I make it sound easy. This is one of the most difficult things a human being can do because it takes great courage. If I'm sitting, I'm a firm believer in sitting practices. So if I'm sitting and suddenly I'm having a vision of suffering and pain, my natural tendency, and this is the tendency forever, is to pull away from it, to make it go away, or to figure out who caused it and get revenge. That's the thing that's with human beings that's so off. We're so still, the monkeys haven't evolved,
Yeah.
and finished evolving. We've evolved a lot, but we haven't finished yet. I'm having maybe this experience with the plant medicine. It's certainly not uncommon to have these experiences come up with plant medicine. How I meet it determines if it's a healing experience or an experience that could lead to further trauma. See, if I'm having one of these, I'll call them a vision, for lack of a better term, flashback, whatever it is, memories, cosmic, universal unconsciousness, the group unconscious, whatever it is. But if I'm having one of these experiences and I fight it, I'm still, my right hand and my left hand are fighting each other. If I'm able to meet these things over and over and over and over again, number one, I get better at meeting them. And number two, those places inside of me, because the only place these things exist is inside of me, right? The past, Rumi said, the past does not exist, the future is but a dream. He said something like that. Yeah. I'm not very good at direct quotes, but something like that. So the dream is within me. Mm-hmm. The karma, if you will, everybody knows karma now, is within me. The Maya, the illusion, is within me. It's all there. So the only place I can really, truly heal it is not by externalizing it onto an external enemy or creating an external enemy on which to externalize it, but by taking full responsibility within myself to meet it, to forgive it, to release it, to trust the entire process of this, even when it gets really scary. That's where the trust came, which related to an experience I had on my first ayahuasca journey. I'm happy to share if you'd like.
Sure.
But, that's the place where the real work happens. With my very first time with ayahuasca, and this was 30-something years ago, I took the medicine and it was strong, and I took it with somebody who, he was competent, he was good, he was good soul, still is. But I was not knowing what to expect. And, I'm having the beautiful fractal light show and geometric patterns and, every breath was delicious and the music was sublime. And then like that, I found myself in what appeared to be a Nazi concentration camp, a death camp, I'll call it, not a concentration camp only, but a death camp. And I was in the line of people that were scheduled to be executed in the ovens or in the gas chambers. I still look back at this as being one of the most astoundingly frightening and amazing experiences of my life, because I knew I wasn't physically there, but I also didn't know what would happen if I got to the gas chambers and was executed. Mm-hmm. I didn't know how to get out of this. I was stuck in it. I couldn't change stations. I couldn't move my body, and I couldn't move my body. It was so strong. I couldn't do anything except be where I was. And what was so interesting about it is that after a while, somewhere between 2 seconds and 1,000 years, I kind of put out a cry to the universe of, what do I do here? And this message came, maybe in a voice, maybe in a feeling, but it was trust and forgive. I was offended. How do you forgive something like that? How does a woman forgive rape? How does a child forgive abuse? How do any of these things happen? Because they were very real. But then it's like, oh, I went into an argument of state with God or whatever the voice was and said, no, I can't. This is too horrible to forgive. It was a bit more animated than this. But, what do I do here? Trust and forgive. Finally, I took it to the next stage, was how do I do that? And it was so simple, how do I forgive? How do I trust? I trust the experience. I trust the inner experience I was having, which I did know was an inner experience. I trust that experience as it's unfolding in the theater of my mind. I'm not talking about a current real-time happening in the real-time trauma here. I'm talking about memories of memories. So, and how do I forgive? By releasing every single connection in my neurological and physical system to this, call it impression, call it a sanskara, if we're going to Vedic ideas here, these scars that are upon the soul that the soul carries from lifetime to lifetime, or from day to day, or from second to second. And in that, I just relaxed and stopped fighting and judging and analyzing and considering and wondering, and just totally took a slow, deep breath, and the whole thing dissolved into the unreality that it was when I was having the experience, because it was just in my mind. Okay, that wasn't the end of it. I went through probably 20 more going back in time experiences that were equally as horrific. And then, just a few years ago, I was in Poland and with a friend of mine, and we were driving to Warsaw. I think we were driving to Warsaw. And we were going past Auschwitz. And I said, we should go. And she said, no, we shouldn't. And I said, you're right, we shouldn't. Then she said, we should go. And I said, no, I don't want to go there. And we just went back and forth until we got to the off-ramp, and it was like, oh, and spent the first day in Auschwitz. It was a horrible day, raining and cold and windy, and went over to Birkenau, which was the death camp. And I walked through the front gate. It was like, this was my vision. I know this place. This was where I was in that vision. Very powerful. And spent the rest of that day, all day, walking through it in forgiveness. Not forgetfulness, but forgiveness.
Yeah.
The action can never be forgotten. What led to it can never be forgotten. But I don't have to carry the hatred and the anger in my heart, because that only hurts me and everybody around me.
When you said that to forgive, you have to release all of those neurological connections, and once you did that, you relaxed. How do you actually make the release happen? And did you have to re-release when you were there in person?
I think the idea of there's one release and then you're done is completely a really beautiful idea that has no basis in reality. It's like, I'm gonna go to one ayahuasca ceremony. I'm gonna go to a therapist once. I'm gonna get Rolfed once. I'm gonna do, qigong one day, and expect that to have a meaning. But it's like trauma release. I won't say it's a full-time job, but it takes the dedication of a full-time job. When I went there again, I would go into the barracks and I'd just sit down and I would feel my heart breaking into pieces and breathing through it until those pieces were gone. In every other place there, I would go through that. And it was one of the most intensely powerful, and I don't think very many people would use this word, beautiful, of experiences I've had in my life. to be there and to, see how bad it can get, because that was as bad as it's gotten, I think. Well, my other visions were pretty awful too, but to be in this place that's really horrific, and to, for myself, for everyone, and I believe for the people that were there, in some way, in some small part, forgive allowed the releasing of my trauma and their trauma and trauma for the future. And was it the release? No, obviously not. There's still tons of trauma happening and will be until we stop doing it. But I feel, at least inside of my own heart, that there was a spaciousness that was there that wasn't there before, that allowed me to do my work better, that allowed me to be more open and loving with people. So, bit by bit. No easy fixes. A lot of people feel like plant medicine is going to be an easy fix. They'll just do it once and everything will be finished. But all these things are paths.
Yeah.
All these things are paths.
Yeah. Well, so
and a path until beginning and no end, too.
A beginning and no end.
Yeah.
Well, I heard you say that as you were there releasing, that you breathed, that you felt your emotion, you felt the heartbreak, and you did that until all the pieces were gone. This makes me think of the concept of integration in trauma healing, and which is also related to sort of that unity consciousness we were talking about. So where did those pieces go? Did they go back into you? Did they go away somewhere? What happened?
I used the phrase before, but they return back to the unreality that they always were.
Okay.
Does anything going on in my head have reality? Could I take one of those pieces out of my head and show it to you? I can't. It exists here, or in my gut, or in my heart, or in my gut, heart, and head, is where it exists as a pattern, as a congestion of life energy that has at some point been chosen, I believe, at some point been chosen to be there, to allow it to be there. And when it's released, it doesn't go any place because it didn't exist in the first place. It was part of what, would be called the dream, the Maya. What would be called the dream. And if, Buddha is called Buddha because Buddha means awakened one, what did he awaken from when he sat for 40 days under the Bodhi tree? What did he awaken from? He woke from the same dream we're all in, which is the dream and the illusion that what's inside of our mind has reality. And the tricky part is, as long as I think it has reality, it does. I'll manifest it into the world in some way or another. And so, enlightening, and I like the word enlightening much more than enlightened or enlightenment, because enlightening has no end. I like that word a lot. Enlightening is the process of the continually waking up from the dream. If I had a childhood trauma, and I did, who didn't, who hasn't, who didn't, who doesn't, if I had a childhood trauma, and I did, the trauma still exists until I release it as memory. Memory is illusion. Good stuff we have to remember to change the oil in your car, but not in these images that haunt us.
Okay.
So waking up from the dream is when you can release all of these. Buddha was attacked by armies of demons. I like to say, to make Lord of the Rings look like child's play, but he was attacked by armies of demons. And what did he do? Did he engage? Did he fight? Did he, pick up a sword? What he did is he just sat unmovingly, unflinchingly. And he just sat until they returned back to the unreality that they were, always were. And this is maybe I'm not sure if this is the way integration people look at this. I I did my ayahuasca work and training before anybody had ever even used that word. Integration was after the ceremony. How you doing? That was intense. Yeah, that was intense. that was the soul integration we did, and
Yeah.
you know, but I think integration has to be acceptance and not giving these messages of the mind enough credence to act upon them for at least a month or two. The practical messages, unless they're sensible. This is how I finish my ceremonies. It's like, don't do anything unless it's exercise more, meditate more, eat better food, be kind, get out in the sun, walk in nature. Don't change your job, don't put a tattoo on your forehead.
Yeah.
Don't do anything like that for a while to make sure that what you have received as the so-called cherished downloads, which is a new term, not a new term, but it's a newish term, the so-called cherished downloads make sense in reality, in this reality that we live within.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah.
I feel like this was a pretty complex concept that we just talked about. And so if it's okay with you, I would love to invite our listeners, if they have questions about what we were just talking about, to put those in the comments of the video or the comments of the show notes. And maybe we could address some of those going forward. But if I could ask a follow-up about reality versus unreality.
Yeah.
Is the unreality the consciousness that we tap into with our heart space, or is that the reality?
Good question. And it's a little more complex because the heart can also have within it gooky emotional stuff.
Oh, yeah. Especially if you've got trauma.
A lot of gooky emotional stuff. So that as well needs to be released and relaxed through. I would say that, in Chinese medicine, the spirit resides in the heart. I would say consciousness in a great deal resides not just in the heart, but that's a main center for it. So going back to Stardust and the creation of the universe, that still exists within. That infinitude of reality exists within. God is within is not a nice idea. And it certainly didn't mean within the pages of the Bible. God is within. So there's also layers upon layers of gook and gunk and, sticky stuff. That has to be healed. One of the beauties of ayahuasca work, and it's the thing that most people will say they don't want to do, is the purge. When you've drunk the ayahuasca and suddenly you don't feel so good and you want help and everything's going wrong and, the demons are walking around in your belly and your heart feels like it's made out of lead and then all of a sudden you're throwing up. And what comes out of you is all that stuff, which was heretofore inside of you, whether you're aware of it or not, and afterwards is in the bucket, no longer within, no longer inside. There's going to be other stuff inside. You don't do it all at once. Can't. There's so much of it. But it's the idea of purification. Purifying the heart is an active process. So that love that I'm speaking of, we could call it love with the capital L. We could call it God with a capital G. We could call it any number of different things. Exists outside of time and space. because it is in the absolute finest tunable exact moment of now. It's like an old shortwave radio. You have two dials. One of them gets you close to the station, and the other one is bigger and doesn't move as fast, and that one is for fine tuning. So it's the infinite fine tuning that a human being who chooses to really walk this path can begin to do. Is it from the past? It's a memory, period. There's no other way to look at it. It's always from the past. Even if I have a memory of the beginning of our conversation, which is really close to now, it's still a memory.
Mm-hmm.
All of my fears and expectations and plans and everything else is in the future. And I'm not saying that it's wrong to have expectations and plans and, excitement for the future. It's absolutely critical to be human to do that. But in this process of fine-tuning into the exact moment of now, which exists in the subtlest movements of breath within, the subtlest movements of the heart, the subtlest, not physical movements, but the subtlest part of our being, that gets past the gunk and into capital R reality, which is, what's called be here now.
Okay. Okay.
Which is called, it's not new. This is not a new concept. I'm saying it maybe in a way people haven't heard before, I hope. But, it's not a new idea. Yarindin, we have a word in, they have a word in one of the Peruvian tribes, the exact moment of now. That's where the love is. That's where the joy is. That's where the peace is. That's where the consciousness is. That's where the strength is. That's where the power is. That's where the beauty is. And that's where the love is.
Okay.
In that exact moment and now, beyond thought, outside
thought.
of time and space, outside of time and space. If I'm thinking it into existence, it's more gunk. It may be very nice gunk. It may be very pretty gunk,
Yeah.
or it may be, pretty gunk that's turned bad and now is really ugly, sticky gunk, we're weird creatures, us human beings, with this stuff.
Yeah.
But that exact moment of now is the exact same moment of now from which the universe was created. Okay. Now is constant. Time moves through us, Rumi said. We don't move through time. Time moves through us. Because that exact moment of now that exists within, that is the soul, that is the spirit, that is God within, is unchanging. It's eternal. It, in the Bhagavad Gita, it can't be cut by a sword. It can't be burned by fire. No matter what happens to the body.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, none of those things ever happen to anybody, But that's the idea that I'm talking about.
Let's pivot, maybe, just a little bit into more of the practicalities of plant medicine, because you've mentioned ayahuasca. You've told us your story of going through it yourself and some of the vivid memories that you confronted. Well, first of all, for somebody who doesn't know much about it, what do they need to know? And when is it okay to use plant medicine like ayahuasca?
Good questions. It's a bit tricky because I would say learn as much about it as you can, but a lot of information out there is not so good, especially if you're learning through teenagers on YouTube videos or TikTok videos.
Yeah.
I think there's a point where, first will come curiosity. Hopefully, probably this conversation will engage some curiosity in people. And then comes learning about it a little bit. And then comes, maybe wanting it. And from the wanting it comes choosing a ceremony to sit in. And that gets controversial. That gets controversial because there's many options now. When I started, it was go to Peru, go to Iquitos, go to the jungle. When I first started, now you can go to Brazil, you can go to a church service down the street, you can go to a Somebody who went down to Peru for a couple of months and came back with a diploma that said they're now certified to serve ayahuasca. And, they've barely started shaving, and wherever they shave. And, so due diligence is really important.
Yeah.
Discovering more about the person who's going to be guiding the ceremony. Do they have a background in a traditional culture? They may not be carrying a traditional culture, but is their background rooted in something that's reality? Or did they go to a festival, drop acid, and decide that they're a shaman? No offense to people who go to festivals. That's something that's really important, is to do due diligence. Find people who are there. Talk to the ceremony leaders. If a ceremony leader won't talk to you because they're too busy, it's probably the wrong ceremony. I personally will have a conference with everybody who wants to come into my work. And so that's important. And the other thing that's a bit more difficult to put a finger on is, how do you feel when you're approaching the work? And there's fear. If you're not afraid, there's something wrong with you, number one. But then there's a more intuitive feeling of yes or no, because an intuitive yes will take one through the fear. An intuitive no might also take you through the fear, but the fear might have you convinced that that no is really your fear and that you should make that no into a yes. And then people can go into bad ceremonies that are not held well.
Mm.
So I can't really say how to find the right ceremony, because it's still considered illegal by the government of the United States, except for a couple churches, and that's about it, a few churches. Let your awareness be your guide. A really valuable process, I think, for people who are wanting to seek this is to do what's called dieta, or diet, which is a real simplification and purification of everything that's taken into the body. A mind that's, influenced by drugs or alcohol is not going to make good decisions. A mind that is toxic with artificial this and artificial that, and, bad foods, and we could do a whole thing on food, which I'm one of my passions. A person that's impure will not, by the very nature of the impurity, make a decision from purity. They'll make a decision from impurity quite often. Not always, but quite often. So take a couple of weeks to purify yourself, to cleanse, to take a break from the intensity of the stimulation of life in the 21st century. Social media break. Phew, is that one hard these days? And then, tune into the heart. Tune into the heart, tune into the heart. The still small voice. And in my experience, that will begin to guide you. What's that poem? It was attributed to Goethe, but it wasn't Goethe. It's like, when one is committed, there's no hesitancy, no chance to draw back. Well, when one is uncommitted, there's hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always confusion. I'm misquoting again, of course. But once one commits, then all manner of providence will change the entire universe around. And this is me, this is not Goethe. Okay, will change the entire universe around to make your commitment come true, to allow that commitment to take form. And that takes trust, because it may not happen instantly. But at that point, your inner radar is going to be looking where it may not have been looking before. And, you may notice somebody on the side of a restaurant who has particularly clear looking, shiny, beautiful eyes, and they're carrying themselves very well. And you might want to go talk to them, and suddenly you discover somebody who just came out of ceremony the next day, the day before. The connections happen.
Yeah.
But be careful.
Yeah.
Be careful.
Yeah. What are some, and I heard you say, like say maybe somebody who dropped acid at a festival and then decided they were a shaman might not be a great guide or place to start. Are there any other red flags that you should look out for?
Somebody who has overly full of themselves, who maybe but not necessarily change their name to something grandiose. Although some people change their name for legal protection because they want to be more anonymous, so it's not always the case, or because they like a new name anyway. But somebody who puts on airs, somebody who's not approachable, somebody who sloughs you off if you want to talk to them, who brushes you off if you want to talk to them, somebody who you just like get a negative feeling from, and somebody who may be worshipped by the people in their community.
Mm.
I saw one guy once, his acolytes would, if he sat down, they'd be there, giving him hand rubs and washing his fingernails. And I was like, and this guy was supposedly a great ayahuasquero, and wow, what is that? Because there's always a danger of cults forming.
Mm. Okay.
So look for somebody who you like. You should like the person you're going to be working with. You should be able to innately trust them.
Mm. Okay.
If they puff you up, also probably not the right person.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I've been waiting for you for a lifetime. 5-alarm fire going off there.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot in the jungle.
Okay.
Oh, you finally came. We've been waiting for you. Ooh, ooh, no.
Yeah.
No, but look for somebody you trust, somebody you like, somebody who's clean, who's running a clean thing. I talk to the people that have been working with them for a while. Are their ceremonies clean? Or does weird stuff go on? You've had some people have ceremonies now and they have virtual orgies going on in them.
Mm.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that. I feel like those are really good takeaways for anyone interested in doing, looking deeper into this type of healing work. There is also plant medicine that has become popular. I mean, I guess it's always been popular, but you hear a lot about THC and psilocybin these days too. Do you have any thoughts around those forms of plant medicine?
Yes. Controversial thoughts, perhaps.
Ooh, I would love to hear those.
I tend to not be a big fan of THC, marijuana, as it is being used now by very many people as a numbing agent.
Yes.
Or as an escaping agent, unless there's a particularly real physical reason that you need to numb your body with it, as you need it as a pain relief, then I think it's a good medicine. As a escape from emotional pain, in my experience, my belief, it does not give you the tools to heal it, but it more or less pushes it off into a dark corner someplace.
Mm.
So I haven't smoked marijuana in decades. I used to. I grew up in California, Southern California, But I see people now who wake up and have to have their medicine, and they call it medicine, and they roll a joint or put, hit their vape or, take a gummy or whatever, and then they do it a few more times during the day. And, the next day, the same thing, 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 ... I think that's not going to lead to the kind of healing that something like ayahuasca can take a person to. At all. It can't, because doesn't have that coming to terms with what's inside of you by facing it and getting it out of your body through the limpia, through the purging. It doesn't have that. It's more like put it inside of a puffball, a cotton ball.
Gotcha.
So you don't feel it. You don't know it's there. And that's controversial because a lot of people really like it. It's just my opinion. And I'll say to somebody, they don't call it dope because it makes you smart,
Yeah.
I get ready for the hate mail now. But if someone wants to smoke it and do that, that's fine. That's their life. I don't care.
Sure.
Psilocybin mushrooms, I think are also a very good medicine. Not in the same category as ayahuasca because it doesn't necessarily have the purge and it doesn't have the same force, that ayahuasca has. It tends to not be as scary, although it can be pretty terrifying for some people. I work with people that can't take ayahuasca because of the medicines they're on or the drugs they're on or whatever, or because they're just too terrified to do it. It's a good thing. And I think the fact that it's being shown to be extremely effective in depression, extremely effective and healthy for brain cells, things like that is a really good indication that it's going to be part of our culture.
Mm.
And I look at that as being valuable. The thing that I did when I was a kid is, eat some mushrooms and go to a party, I wouldn't recommend as a healing modality unless you're terrified of going to parties and you're going to face your fear in the party and probably make a fool of yourself. But so what? It's a party,
Yeah. Okay.
Other things, there's smoking DMT is really popular, or 5-MeO DMT. I'm an ayahuasca person. That's my medicine. So to me, these things are too much, too fast, too short, too intense to really have the same unfolding beauty and learning that ayahuasca takes a person through. There'll be new ones coming because MDMA, I think, is really super valuable for people who've been through trauma because it does allow you into that place of trust and forgive pretty rapidly and pretty elegantly, pretty gently. So I think that can be an incredibly beneficial tool for trauma release. And I'm sure there's new ones coming out that'll be even getting better and better because we're learning more and more about how these things work and more about how the brain works. And, more and more people are out there wanting to be the inventor of the next greatest semi-plant or, medicine.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. You mentioned how some of these medications aren't beneficial if they're numbing or if they go too far too fast. When should a person rely on, say, meditation and mindfulness or therapy over something like plant medicine, ayahuasca, that's a slower finding?
Yeah, I think, it's a really good path to take. And I would say that most people are too messed up to do that effectively in a way that does not take the rest of their life to get through it. Plant medicine can take the rest of your life too, but it's different. I think numbing agents could be beneficial if what you're numbing is too much to handle and you cannot handle it.
That makes
When
sense.
I was in school, well, we were talking about workers' compensation, and if the patient says, whenever I'm working, it just hurts so much, I can't stand it anymore. I don't want to work. It's like, too bad. You're going to work. I cannot do it. When I stand up to screw in the widget on the what's it, my arm goes numb and I can't turn my wrist. Then you get the workers' compensation. That's like cannot versus don't want to. So cannot face the intensity of the trauma means that you're non-functional. And using something like THC, gummies, whatever, might give you the tools to make your life functional. Hopefully while you're seeking other healing paths as well and making changes to your life and not turning into total reliance upon that numbing agent. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. Yeah.
Okay.
So, thank you for clarifying that. And Richard, is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you think is important to share?
Read my book.
I want to, because I
You talk about
haven't.
integration. Talk
Yeah.
about integration. So, you know, for the last 10, 15 years, I've had this idea of a book rattling around my brain. Before I wrote it, 15 years before, and it was rattling around and it was rattling around and I'd sit in ceremony and, and like, write your book already, write your book already, write your book already, do it. Oh man, what are you taking so long for? Then COVID hit. And I found myself, basically a prisoner of my beautiful space here up in the mountains, and which was not a bad place to be a prisoner of COVID. And combined with insomnia. So I'd wake up at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, lying in bed going, what do I do? Oh, this is horrible. I want to sleep. Write a book. What do I do? I don't want to write a book. It's cold, write your book. Finally I just started like getting out of bed and writing. And the first few words were really hard.
Yeah.
And then over the course of some years, the book became a book. My stories became the book, and my philosophies and ideas became this book that everybody who's read it so far that I've talked to has really gotten a lot of value out of it. I've seen some people in my community or in other communities carrying it around like a Bible, which it's not. It's not, but it's a really good guidebook. It's rich with experience and rich with practical understanding of what it means to trust and forgive. What it means to be a human being in a traumatized world.
So the book is called Trust and Forgive, the Medicine of Your Life. Where can people find your book and your platform, your Heart Feather platform, or any other work?
Sure. Right now, you can get it through the Heart Feather platform or on Amazon. I don't have it anyplace else, but it's available on Amazon in Kindle, hardcover, and softcover. Heart Feather, I will give people a mnemonic that they won't ever forget this. So in Egyptian cosmology, when a human being dies, they are taken to be in front of Osiris, who takes their heart out, gives it to Ma'at, who puts it on a scale, an old-fashioned balance scale, puts your heart on the scale. On the other side is a feather. So if your heart weighs more than the feather, you don't get to move on. If your heart weighs less than the feather, then you get admittance into the heavenly realms. So, and of course, the heart of a living person has a different weight than the heart of a dead person, because the heart of a dead person is all their cares, fears, concerns, traumas, everything that they didn't heal in this lifetime, that they carry with them as sanskaras, again, Vedic terminology, as the scars on the spirit that have not been healed. So that's why, like, when I had that idea one night during a dream, I think I had that vision. I was like, oh, Heart Feather is a perfect name for this work.
Yeah.
May your heart be lighter than a feather. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Well, the links for all of those things will be in the show notes or the description on YouTube. And Richard, thank you so much for coming on the show today and the work you're doing in the world.
Thank you so much. This was a delightful conversation, truly. Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in. Check out more of our episodes here and at humanamplified.com. Remember to subscribe.